Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Okay, Dhamma friends, so yesterday I began to speak about the Noble Eightfold Path and about how to practice and integrate the practice of meditation into our daily life when you go home from the retreat. And yesterday I finished talking about the 8 factors of the Eightfold Path, and it mentioned how all those 8 factors are grouped under 3 categories, or 3 umbrella groups, called Sila, Samadhi, and Panya, or the skillful conduct, concentration, and wisdom. Now, the Noble Eightfold Path is the 4th of the 4 Noble Truths. And the first Noble Truth is the truth of suffering. And I want to explain that because the whole of the Noble Eightfold Path, and especially the categories of Sila, Samadhi, and Panya, are really focused on overcoming those that first noble truth of suffering, the 3 different categories of suffering. So in the Buddha's definition, when he defined the 4 Noble Truths, he said, what is the truth of suffering? He said, it was birth, sickness, old age, disease, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair that's connected with all those problems of the body. Or you could say, the heavy types of physical suffering, the common ones that most people understand, get in accidents, get sick, diseases, and so many kind of, problems with the body, and then the mental anguish, worrying about that, worrying about the body, and worrying about old age and death. But then the Buddha went on to say that not getting what you want and getting what you don't want is suffering. So this definition of suffering is connected with, of course, the physical world and the body and so on, but it's more mental. And basically, it's kind of like a dissatisfaction with what is, and always wanting more, or wanting to get away from the struggle between pleasurable and painful feelings. And because they're impermanent, we can't control those feelings. And as soon as we get a pleasurable feeling, it doesn't last very long, and then we become addicted to that, and then we have to, crave and go after some other pleasurable feeling. Then that also changes, and so we're never really satisfied because we can't hang on to those pleasurable feelings. And then the painful ones that come to us are the unpleasant ones that come to us. We're always getting bugged and wanting to rub or scratch this itch or uncomfortable feeling, or react to unpleasant sights, sounds, smells, and other things that are going on around us, getting upset, perturbed, bugged, irritated at so many things going on. And this process goes on almost continuously. And the fact that even every time after sitting 10 minutes, you get a little bit discomfort, and you change your posture, you go like this, or, we probably do that hundreds of times a day and hardly even know it. And then, as I give that one example, even blinking, we blink normally because there's some kind of a subtle irritation in the eye or in the eyelid. And we hardly even know that we're blinking, or we're blinking for that reason. But if you stop and observe it, you see that that's the reason why we blink. There's some kind of subtle irritation there. So anyway, this process is always going on, and basically it's a dissatisfaction with what is in whatever comes to us in the present moment. So it's a more continuous state of, it's what we call existential angst. It's knowing that everything is impermanent, and deep down we know that that's true, but we do our best to try to ignore it or hide it by masking it over with so many other types of amusements and diversions. And then there's the third level of suffering. The Buddha went on to say, in short, after explaining all those first two types of suffering, let's say the physical level of suffering, the mental level of suffering, in short, the five aggregates of clinging are suffering. Now, I was talking about this the other day as one of the groups of Dhamma that we contemplate in the foundations of mindfulness. And basically not understanding, the Buddha said also, is not understanding these five aggregates and people grasping after them as I, me, and myself, that, people have, continue to be caught up in the rounds of suffering and unhappiness. So basically it's not knowing the truth. Not knowing the truth about the five aggregates is that level of suffering. And I like to refer to it as the suffering of ignorance, or even spiritual suffering. That means because we're ignorant of the deeper truths about what life is. And generally we call that, spiritual knowledge is the knowledge of, something that's beyond just this gross body and physical world. So that suffering from ignorance. Because people might be quite well off physically. Some people go through life without too many physical problems and so on. Like my mother, she's 101 years old, but until she was 99, she hardly ever had any problems with her body that I know of, except for some arthritis. So, some minor little things, or a minor stroke, but nothing like you hear so many people suffering with. But anyway. Now she's suffering from that old age. But anyway, so some people maybe fairly have relatively good health. They might be relatively well off and have to do whatever have enough funds to do whatever they want to do, and on the outside appear to be kind of happy, but as we well know, a lot of these people are inwardly, mentally, they suffer. And they have to take drugs on account of that or other things. So anyway, these three levels of suffering are what are addressed and worked on in a practice of Dhamma, and especially with those categories of Sila, Samadhi, and Panya. So the practice of Sila, I already touched on that the other day, is the practice basically of observing the precepts, ways of learning how to, you could say, control or manage our actions in speech. The three doorways of karma through which we commit karma are through the body, the speech, and the mind. And so the practice of Sila are guidelines that how to use our body and speech in ways that don't create waves in the world. And we mentioned that the law of karma is one of the natural laws, illustrated by the Dhammapada verse. All actions are led by the mind. Mind is their master, mind is their maker. Act or speak with an impure mind and suffering follows. Act or speak with a pure mind and happiness follows. So again, it's a natural law. But most people are living out of harmony with the natural law. And that's when suffering is created. Because they're acting with impure or unskillful states of mind. That means greed, hatred, and delusion. And harming themselves and harming others in the pursuit of their pleasure. So, anyway, the practice of Sila, as we mentioned, is the practice to cool down, the way to cool our negative actions by observing at least the 5 precepts. So the 5 precepts are the minimum amount of, let's say, the precepts or rules, you could say, training rules for the average person to minimize the amount of suffering that comes to them through their actions. And Sila is sort of like having a policeman in your mind. So let's say if, in the cities, in the traffic, if the lights go out, the traffic lights go out, and then there's a policeman directing traffic. And he's telling, these people to come on and these people to stop. When a policeman's out there, everyone obeys the policeman. They drive video. But then when the policeman goes for lunch, what happens? Then the people will run the red light, they'll do an illegal turn, they'll cut people off because there's no one out to watch them. So in the same way, if we don't have any guidelines, the way to live our life, then the mind will just be led on by its conditionings, through desire, aversion, and other habits that we've accumulated during our life. So the practice of Sila is like it's a forced behavior, at least for most people. I know there's some people in the world that kind of have a natural Sila and they may not have ever much broken any of the precepts, but for probably a majority of the people, that uncontrolled behavior is quite prevalent in societies, even religious societies. And most religions have these guidelines of skillful behavior, like 10 Commandments, and then the 5 precepts, or 8 precepts, even more, and other religions have their own. But generally, some people follow them and some people don't. So we have to force ourselves to try to change our habits. And that's why practicing sila isn't enough, because we often, despite our resolve and to want to, follow the precepts, sometimes we break them because of the uncontrolled urges, or because of the some passion arises and we get overwhelmed by that, and so we may do something that then we regret later on, and have to experience the painful consequences of that later on. So that's why practicing sila alone is not enough. And that's why the Buddha also followed that, or at the same time with the practice of concentration or meditation. And that means training our mind, not only our body. So with the practice of sila, basically we're just managing or training our body not to kill, steal, lie, cheat, and various things that we do with our body or speech. But practicing sila doesn't necessarily change your mind, change the way you think. Now it might to a certain extent, but it doesn't get at the deeper unconscious urges and impulses that can come up, unexpectedly in certain situations. So the practice of sila helps to calm and purify the mind, where the ideas to break those precepts originate. It was the mouth start telling a lie just doesn't do it on its own. There has to be a thought in the mind, a scheme, and a reason why one wants to tell a lie, or to slander somebody, or to steal something, or to even kill somebody, or any of the other precepts, to go out and get drunk. So it's the practice of meditation that helps to even calm those urges to for the unskillful behavior. And I always give the example of, let's say, you're trying to follow the precept not to kill. Then you're meditating, maybe outside somewhere on a summer day, and all of a sudden, bzzz, a mosquito lands on you. And when the mosquito starts drilling his needle into your skin, and the first thing you might do is say, sensation, and kind of try to tolerate it, but then it goes deeper and deeper, and that pain gets, and you see that urge to want to get rid of it, and that urge that pain and the urge kind of overwhelm one's sort of common sense for a moment, and then you see the arm starting to come up like that. At the last minute, you remember, panatipata veramani, and force yourself not to kill the mosquito. But you would have liked to, or at least to gotten rid of it. So that shows that, the practicing sila itself doesn't necessarily overcome the mental urges to, do those unskillful actions. And I'm sure you've all had the experience that when you meditate, or after some time, if you practice meditation long enough, for brief periods in some meditation, you might reach a point where the mind became quiet and centered, and you stopped obsessing or worrying about the outside world or things, and the mind got quite peaceful, and you were quite content. And maybe even there was a passing thought of, I wish I could stay like this forever. Anybody ever have a thought like that? But at that moment, you were totally content. And the last thing that would come through your mind is probably wanting to break any of the precepts. Because at that moment, you were so perfectly content. But of course, you can't stay in that state forever. And so when you come out of those meditation states, then as you get active again, then the old habits of thought and desire and aversion, will come again. And that's why even practicing samadhi, or just concentration, just quieting the mind, is also not enough. And that's why the Buddha, the crown jewel of the Buddha's teaching is wisdom. Because many other philosophies or even religions or some paths of spiritual paths have practices of meditation in them. But most of them are just calming type of meditations. Or meditations that, can get you quite deep, but not necessarily have the type of wisdom that we cultivate in the practice of, mindfulness and vipassana and what the Buddha advocated. That means seeing impermanence, suffering, and no self, anicca, dukkha, and anatta. So that's why the teachings of wisdom, or the category of wisdom, that includes right understanding and right thought, are included in that category of wisdom, especially the third level of wisdom I talked about. Talked about the three levels of wisdom: intellectual wisdom, reflective wisdom, and then the wisdom that comes out of the deep insights that come out of your meditation, those aha moments of seeing a deeper meaning of impermanence or no self or conditioning. Something it never sort of dawned on you before, just a unique twist of whatever you might have understood before about impermanence or no self. In a moment of deeper insight, that becomes, aspects of that become, more clear. So anyway, so these three stages of sila, samadhi, and panya. And so that the level of panya, the practice of panya, addresses the spiritual suffering, because in that are the states of enlightenment. When you attain those stages that we were mentioning about entering the stream and so on, those are the type of insights that destroy the root of the defilements. So in the practice of concentration, only suppresses the negative mind states, suppresses the hindrances, suppresses the defilements temporarily, but it doesn't get down at the root of them. Whereas the level of wisdom actually penetrates down to the roots of ignorance and gradually wears out those roots of ignorance, or uproots them with those deep insights I mentioned, to destroy the defilements. So I usually give this analogy about between concentration and wisdom. That, when you meditate, and if let's say you're practicing anapanasati, or you're chanting some mantras, or you're doing some other type of meditation, but let's say even just anapanasati, if you're just focusing at the tip of the nose and you want to gain in nimitta, so you see the bright light in the mind, and to have some other types of experiences, a person can do that. But if you do it only for that purpose, or gaining a deep tranquility, but don't go on to develop wisdom, then that tranquility is similar to the analogy of the jack-in-the-box. The jack-in-the-box toy, a tin can with a head of a clown or a devil. In German they call it the devil. No? What is it? Toisten? Kastenteufel. Devil in a box. Yeah, we call it a jack in a box, but in German it's a devil in a box. Anyway, so that head is on a spring, and you push it down in the box and put the lid on it. So while the lid is on the box, the head stays down. Now in that analogy, the head represents greed, hatred, and delusion. And especially the ego. Look at me, look at me. I, me, mine. But in the practice of samadhi, when you gain a deep concentration, that head is pushed down in the box and kept down by the sheer power of your concentration. The ability to keep the mind focused on the nimitta or whatever, and not to be distracted. But then when that's given up, when you come up out of the meditation, then the power of that spring underneath is still strong. So when you take the head, when you take the lid off of the box, the head jumps out, boing, and with a lot of power. And why is that? Because of the spring, right? So in the same way, when we practice just concentration, just to concentrate, to try to quiet the mind, it's like the defilements, agitation, worry, and the other hindrances are just pushed from the top. You're kind of pushing them from the top down. And then when you let it up, they come back up again. That's why you can see sometimes, maybe in yourself or maybe some others, I know I've seen it happen even on retreats. People go on a retreat for a long time, they're just practicing concentration only. The last day of the retreat or shortly after, then those agitations and defilements can come out sometimes strongly. They get angry, go out and indulge in things and so on. But when you practice the vipassana meditation, That means developing the insight into anicca, dukkha, and anatta, but especially the anatta, when you see through the illusion of the ego, that has a powerful effect of going right down into the very core or depth of the unconscious mind and making some changes in the infrastructure of the consciousness itself, especially the ego delusion, because that lies at the very deepest level of the mind, the sense of self, because that's where it started. If we go back to the analogy or example of the baby, when it's born, just, for the sake of the argument, when the baby's born, let's say its mind is clean, although it does have ignorance, we're not denying that. But as far as the thoughts about past and future and other, or the feeling of I and ego, it doesn't have that yet. But that's when it starts, when it starts its first desire and aversion and gets all this attention from the outside, that the feeling of the I is generated. And that becomes one of the first elements of our consciousness, of ego consciousness. And then because of that, then it starts developing all of its desires and aversions for pleasurable and painful feeling and its reactions, and it just keeps growing. So I'm just saying this to show that the ego is the very deepest level of embedded in the consciousness, and that's why it's so difficult to root out. But, with the experience of entering the stream, as we mentioned the other night, that gives a person the first real glimpse of that, where that light of wisdom, penetrates right down to the root and weakens that sense of ego. And that, permanently changes the infrastructure of the consciousness and its habits in terms of the three fetters. So with entering the stream, the three fetters are destroyed. The belief in a self that we mentioned the other night. And then the other two of doubts, any doubts about the Dhamma that you might have had before. Like, is enlightenment really a real thing? I mean, is there such thing? I mean, can we really change our mind? And, people have these doubts. Usually they're fed into them from others, but still these doubts are there. But when you get that first glimpse, those doubts are overcome. Or even as to whether the Buddha was really an enlightened being. Because you see how nobody else would come up with this fantastic scheme of the Eightfold Path and meditation to directly explore and reach the depths of the mind, except somebody who has been there. Anyway, so in the Vipassana meditation, developing insight, it's like, to use this analogy of the jack-in-the-box, it's like you get a pair of wire cutters and you go down into the bottom of the box and you cut the spring, 25% of the spring, you cut that wire, 1/4 away. So when the head comes up the next time, it comes up with only 75% of its previous power. So it's a little weaker, but it's still strong, but it's definitely weaker. And then you go on meditating, and at some point you get that experience again, this powerful insight that goes down there again and cuts another 25% of the spring away. So the next time you come out of meditation, consciousness only has its half of its previous power. And then with the next stage of the never returning, it cuts another 25% to the wire. And then the final stage of full enlightenment, it's like the last bit of the spring is cut through. Then when you take the lid off the box, what happens? Nothing comes up. I mean, in terms of the ego. And so it's an interesting little analogy about, showing kind of like the difference between meditating where you just want to attain a quiet mind and feel good sensations, blissful sensations, and just hang out with that for, a period of time, as opposed to, analyzing, scrutinizing the mind in terms of, with the 4 foundations of mindfulness, cultivating the enlightenment factors, and, getting those insights into no self. So the practice of sila helps to deal and manage our external life, or our material life of the body, helps to deal with, accepting or coping with old age, sickness, or, to prevent the harmful things that come to us. Because even lots of sicknesses or diseases and even death comes from the results of our actions, doesn't it? And if we go out with greed and we eat a bunch of, unhealthy or polluted food, we might get a disease from that, or, just because of our, quest for adventure, and go into snake-infested jungles and get bit by a poison snake or something. Or, anyway, there's, hundreds and thousands of examples. Or out of a fit of boredom or whatever, you intoxicate your mind and jump in your car and wind up, breaking your body or killing others. So, the practice of sila can help to minimize that kind of, and then also the grief and lamentation, despair that comes because of those actions. And the samadhi, calming the mind, helps to make the mind more content, helps to weather the not getting what you want and getting what you don't want. Like if you practice samadhi enough and meditation every day quite a lot, then a lot of those things might stop bothering you, and you might feel, quite content. But even that would not necessarily weaken the ego or overcome the deepest levels of ignorance. And so with the practice of the cultivating insight, developing wisdom, that bhavana maya panya, and that helps to eradicate those levels of ignorance. And it's interesting, the word ignorance, it comes from the word ignore, to ignore. So it means ignoring the truth. From the Dhamma point of view, ignorance is not, not knowing how to, your multiplication tables or something, but, is to ignore the truth about the larger realities. So, and that's why, again, the meditation plays the cornerstone teaching in that you won't be able to successfully practice sila without, the practice of meditation. That means without becoming mindful and developing more tranquility and especially mindfulness. And without that, then one won't be able to, the deeper levels of wisdom won't arise if the mind is still not reached some tranquility. Now, having, kind of explained all that, we have to integrate that in our, daily life. Because really the practice of Dhamma is really in the practice of the daily life. A lot of people think the practice of Dhamma is, they give danas, they listen to bana, they do some other things, but, they may have not meditated. And a lot of people think that the practice of Dhamma is these external type of rituals. But the real practice of Dhamma is occurring out there on the street in your daily life, when again these four Nis could happen. Things can happen, unexpected situations. And you have to know how to be able to manage your emotions and your reactions, especially with your interactions with others, to avoid unnecessary conflicts. And so we have to have that mindfulness and right understanding, available. And as I mentioned yesterday about the 3 pillars of the Eightfold Path. Everybody remember those? The 3 pillars are the 3 most important steps of the Eightfold Path. Try to get them in order. Well, maybe there's no exact order, but right understanding, right mindfulness, and right effort. Yeah. But when people go on meditation retreats, there's usually people go on retreats for a different, from different, motivations or from different starting points. So there's a beginner who might go on a retreat who never did a retreat before, but they heard about meditation. Maybe they've done a couple meditation classes. So they go on a retreat, and maybe it's a weekend retreat, maybe it's a week retreat, or for some people even a 10-day retreat. And my first retreat was one month. Can you believe that? First retreat ever was 1 month. Here, if you say we're having a weekend retreat, 3-day retreat, people say, oh my God, 3 days without talking, oh my gosh, how can I do that? And so even they balk and have fear of a 3-day retreat. But in Nepal, when I heard about, they're going to have a meditation course. And I said, oh, really? And he said, yeah, but it's 1 month long. I didn't even hear that. It doesn't matter. I'm going. And I went. I didn't even think about 1 month. Well, it was going to be too long. But anyway, and you might get some good experiences in that retreat and get, enthusiastic and, oh, wow, okay, I'm going to go home, I'm going to meditate every day for a couple of hours. So there's some people that, go on their first retreat and then they usually, and then they get the motivation to, really start practicing meditation and go on with successive retreats. And there's others who already been there, done that, and they've been going on retreats for many years. But each retreat for them is sort of like a battery charge for their meditation. Because what happens in many people, probably most, is that when they go home from a retreat, they might have that enthusiasm to want to meditate every day or twice a day. And they find that after a short period, their meditation drops off. And they find themselves, not meditating much, for their different reasons. Because we all have good intentions, but there's a saying, I don't know where it came from, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I mean, people have all these good intentions of what they should do and what they shouldn't do. When it comes down to actually implementing that and following that, and then often they fall short, like with New Year's resolutions, right? So that people find that going on retreat is like a little battery charge to boost their energy and to remind them about the Dhamma, and then hopefully to want to kickstart their practice. And so they try to, begin a more regular practice, but yet then the same thing happens again. After some time, the practice kind of drops away, and they find themselves doing that for even years and years. Anybody ever have that experience? I don't see any hands. No? No, okay. So, what's a person to do? So there's a way, a new kind of meditation is not new now, but and you've all heard, this practice of the M&Ms. So there's a new kind of meditation called the minute meditation, an M&M. And it's a specific training that you can do in your daily life that doesn't require, big amounts of time. Because the average person, they've probably been to retreats and their teacher says, oh, you have to meditate for 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour in the evening, especially if you've gone to these Goenka retreats. That's normally what they recommend, and even other places too. Or at least meditating twice a day, whether it's for 1 hour or it's 45 minutes. And so, when you think, oh, I have to sit and meditate for 1 hour, it seems so daunting. Maybe you're tired, and so it's it's a big kind of burden. And you feel if you can't meditate an hour, might as well not even do it. So there's another kind of meditation, a 1 minute meditation. So when you ask somebody, oh, can you sit for 1 minute? What? Oh, 1 minute? Oh, well, 1 minute. I mean, you'd have to feel kind of foolish to say you can't stop for 1 minute, right? Because we waste so much time during the day just idly letting our mind daydream or, read the newspaper 3 times or something. So, stopping for 1 minute is not that daunting of an assignment, or at least it doesn't sound that way. So anyway, it's a practice, and you all know this, but I'll just repeat it, where you pause during the day for 1 minute every hour. Whether you set the time on your beeper or watch, or you just remember it yourself, or rather than maybe specific times, I recommend people just, whenever you finished one kind of major chore or errand or job, before you rush to the next one, pause. And just bring your attention to feel your feet pressing the floor. If you're standing, if you're sitting in a chair and you're doing it, then to feel your buttocks pressing the seat, and just bring your attention to the body. Kind of let go of that rush to the future and just come to feel the body in whatever position it's in, and take one or two deep 3-part breaths. And that 3-part breath is really, in my own experience, is like a miracle worker. It's like a miracle, because in just one 3-part breath, if you do it slowly, it already takes up almost a minute. Or certainly 2 3-part breaths takes you more than a minute if you're doing it slowly and holding in the breath several seconds, and feeling the long out breath and pausing. And while you're doing that, you can't really think about anything else, because it's such a strong in-your-face sensation. I mean, the ability to regulate the breath and draw it from the lower part up through the middle to the top. It takes all your focus and energy to do that. So during that time, there's very little thoughts about anything else. And when you're holding in the breath, usually it's quite a pleasant feeling, and you feel those subtle little vibrations of the oxygenation of the blood, or there's subtle little energies. You just feel that pause, where the mind can't really think. And then you slowly let out the breath. By the time you've let out the breath, you've already forgotten about what it was you were going to do next, perhaps. Or at least it feels so nice, you just stay there for another few seconds and then just feel the present moment, Just remember, I was standing, present moment. Reflect whatever you can reflect on the Dhamma, bring it to mind. Or during that 1 minute, you could reflect on, or if there's any strong thoughts in your mind from the previous hour, reflect on that. Especially like if you got upset in the last hour with somebody or with yourself because you said or did something that, upset somebody or so. Or somebody did something to you and you're holding some resentment about. Practice forgiveness there and then. And forgive that person for what they might have said or did to you that last hour. And also forgive yourself if you did something uncool, during that last hour. Forgive yourself. Understanding, okay, we all make mistakes. We do it because we're unmindful. And, just try to be more mindful next time. Anyway, so the idea is that you don't carry any resentment, ill will, or stress from the previous hour. You try to let go and release that in that 1 minute, and to kind of touch base, with the body and the present moment, and just remind yourself the Dhamma. Okay, whatever I'm going to do next, let me do it mindfully. Relax. Just tell yourself to relax, and then go about what you need to do. But then you do it again in the next hour. And so, but you need to make it be effective. You really need to try to do it every hour. But Even myself, sometimes I've found out I, didn't remember to do it sometimes. And when I've asked people that I've been teaching this to for 20 years if they do it, they usually say, yeah, 2 times a week. Stop 1 time or something. Or once a day. Of course, that's better than nothing, but still it's not going to do too much in terms of really setting up the type of mindfulness that will really, help you. So anyway, you try to do that, make those pauses every hour. The idea is to come back to the present moment, to break that neurotic push into the future. Because most people go on collecting stress hour by hour throughout the day without pausing, reflecting on it, and letting it go. And by the end of the day, they're a nervous wreck, or they're all stressed out, and they take it out on others when they go home, or they have to stop and get a drink or something. But the practice of those M&Ms helps to close the gap between the periods between our meditation. And even if you do meditate twice a day, still mostly there'll be 6 or 8 or maybe 10 or 12 hours between your meditations. And usually the effects of one meditation probably wear off after a couple of hours. Because a lot of people who don't meditate for long periods, for like say an hour a day, if they're only meditating half an hour a day or half an hour once a day or half an hour every 2 or 3 days, that's not really enough to bridge the gap between the unmindful times and to overcome the accumulation of stress and so on that, probably would have come. So doing the M&Ms is really the better way to do that. And so for many people, if they could really do that and they didn't even do longer meditations, in some ways it might be more beneficial for them. But of course, ideally, the best way is to also meditate longer, a morning meditation of 30 minutes, 45 minutes, or an hour, and then do these M&Ms during the day. And then hopefully, if you're not so stressed out at the end of the day, then you might feel like doing a longer evening meditation. Especially like a metta meditation is good to do in the evening. So if there is any residual ill will, resentment, or something that, Donald Trump said something on the news that irritated you or something like that, or some other politician, send them metta. And don't, even though we'd like to, don't generate kind of a hatred and so on, because that's just a poison for your own mind and nervous system. And apart from those, minute meditations, there's other times during the day where you might have 10 seconds of idle time, where there's nothing much to do, waiting for something. Waiting in a doctor's office, waiting in the line at the supermarket, waiting in the post office, waiting in a traffic light. That's probably, more common for a lot of people these days. If you're riding a bicycle, in Germany, you have to stop there and wait for the light, right? So, you can practice it then too. Even if it was just for 10 or 15 seconds, for the space of just one deep, slow breath, just to kind of bring the mind away from that external excitement and the push to the future, and touch base with, the feet pressing the ground. Take a deep breath. Just remind yourself, slow down. Stay centered. You just learn a couple of useful little phrases or words like that you can use as a mantra to always remind yourself. So stop, look, and listen stop, look, and listen is also it's an old cliched kind of thing, but it also illustrates the practice of mindfulness. You stop what you are doing, you look inside, see what is in your mind, and you listen to the subtle vibrations, or to hear sounds, or just listen to your thoughts. So anyway, and so there's many chances to practice that. Especially, also standing in the line at the supermarket checkout counter. There's lots of things going on. Instead of looking around, getting distracted, or criticizing some lady for the way she's screaming at her kids or something, just feel your feet on the ground, take a few deep breaths. May all beings be well and happy. May all beings be free from greed, hatred, and delusion. Just a few little phrases of metta like that. And so if you do those kind of things regularly, then when something happens, that habit of pausing will be not too far away. It'll be kind of, that memory of that will just be hanging out right above your shoulder. And you can catch yourself quickly before immediately rushing out. Oh, pause, okay. And just take a deep, slow breath, relax, and you see how nice that feels. I mean, how many people during the retreat, did that whenever I, mentioned it? Or especially, at the end of meditation, if I just rang a gong and said, okay, now do standing meditation, most people would just jump up out of their seat like a rocket being fired off. Like they see them doing in Zen centers, and then start walking. But they don't pause. So they might not look where they're going and trip over something. But anyway, the standing is the transition from non-doing to doing, or from doing to non-doing. But people are usually in a rush, and like they rush, even to come to the meditation hall, they rush to the meditation hall and just sit down. And then when the period's over, they get up real quickly and go off. But I encourage people to make those pauses, before going off. And if I wouldn't remind people about it, most people would forget about it and not even hardly pause at all. But how many people found that standing meditation is also a good way of having awareness? So I encourage you to really practice that more, because especially if you have aversion to sitting, or you have a pain in the body and or it's difficult to sit, practice standing awareness. And you can get quite deep in that as well. So anyway, so practicing like that during the day, that's really, where the rubber meets the road. Because that's where you're going to encounter most of your stress and anxiety and unpleasant situations. Again, in those four N's, that any situation can happen to anybody. You could be at work in the morning, get a call from the police saying your son or daughter got picked up for playing hooky or for drugs or something, and then you can see your reaction. In a police station, you got to come down here. And you can feel your emotions starting to boil over, or you get to work and the boss says, "Well, I'm sorry, we're going to have to terminate you now." And then you can see your reaction. Or the boss calls you in and says, well, your colleague over there is saying you cheated or told some lies or you stole something. What? It's not true. The guy's spreading rumors. So, these things happen a lot, especially in business situations and at work. Or so many other chances you get a call from the doctor's office in the afternoon saying that test you had 3 weeks ago came out positive for this or that, and then you see my mind getting anxious and worry and start thinking about worst case scenarios and jumping to conclusions and causing a lot of unnecessary stress and anxiety. So, but if you're used to these, doing the M&Ms, and you're in touch with the body, then you feel those early warning signals. Because again, almost every emotion and thoughts that we have, especially emotions, they have early warning signals that are triggering them off. Usually some kind of body tension or sensations. But because we're out of touch with the body and we're not really grounded in it, then we don't notice it. Only when it's got to a point where it's already consuming us, that only then we recognize it, and then it's harder to kind of tone down. But that's why mindfulness of the body practice is actually one of the best overall, all-purpose and overall general types of practice to have. Again, because we carry it around with us all the time. You can't always carry your casino device around with you. Your round circle of blue or red color, or your earth casino, or listen. You can't always feel the subtle little sensation at the tip of your nose. But almost anybody could at any time feel their feet pressing the ground, feel the clothing touching the skin, or other parts of the body, really. And it's there. That's what the Buddha said, inviting you to come and see. The Dhamma, ehipasiko, inviting you to come and see. That's what the body, inviting you to come and, hang out in the body. Inviting you, come home for a minute. Come back home. Feel the body. But no, people want the biggies, So anyway, that's just my encouragement to you, and because so this will probably be one of the suffice for the closing talk at the retreat, because half of our members are going to be leaving in the morning, early morning, even before the first meditation. So I wanted to cover some of those points before they left. So again, if you have any questions came up about any of those things, how to practice in daily life, or other questions about the Dhamma, then you can write them down for the evening's question period. Okay?